ebooks. Like I mentioned before, throughout his story, it's constantly God giving the Britons second chances. You know, they fall from the top of the wheel of fortune. They fall from the golden age into winter, their summer into winter, and then God lets them return to summer again. And instead of learning from the lessons of the past, they just repeat the same mistakes again until ultimately they're invaded and they become a minority. Now, the sword and the stone in the later retellings of Arthur is exactly that point. The sword and the stone isn't. Well, it's an example of esoteric knowledge again. The sword and the stone isn't a literal sword and a stone. It's supposed to be an example of Arthur choosing to go on the defined path. That's why it's only Arthur who's able to pull the sword from the stone. No other can, because the gods have chosen Arthur for this specific path. For example, it's like the gun argument they use in America. You know, a gun's only kills people if you use it, right? A sword can
Guns don't kill people; people kill people.
Yeah, a sword can only be used as a sword if you ignite your will to use it in that way. It's like a stone. A stone just remains a stone unless you pick up a stone, and when you use it as a weapon, that's your will choosing to do that.
Is the sword in the stone? Is that Mallory?
Yeah.
So yeah, Monmouth doesn't talk about it, does it?
No.
Like
but
he mentions that he calls his sword. Is it Caliban?
Mm-hmm. And then it's
which is it's a great sword, but it's not magical in any way.
Yeah.
There's no Lady of the Lake. There's no getting the sword out of the stone. He's got a spear and a shield that are also named.
Yeah.
But that's it, right?
But it's
well, you can just see that Monmouth is sort of the earliest version, and that later people over centuries have like added to it and kept adding to it.
Yeah. But my point is, this later people seem to know exactly what Joffrey was talking about, because when Arthur pulls the sword out of the stone, he then breaks the sword out of this meaningless squabble he has with somebody else, and this sword shatters. And then Merlin takes him to the lake, in which the Lady of the Lake comes out with the sword and gives him it, and the Lady of in Celtic times, rivers, bodies of water, lakes, ponds, they represented this crossing between the material world and the spiritual world. So that's why these swords and shields, which are now displayed in the British Museum, have been found in different rivers, including the River Thames, and because they were given as offerings to the gods.
Obviously sacrifices.
So the Lady of the Lake, she's coming out with the sword, not just returning the offering to Arthur, but to say, look, you've been put on the path of the gods. You've gone off it because you got into this meaningless squabble and your sword shattered, the sword which you pulled from the stone, which you could only wield. But I'm giving you a second chance. Here's this mightier sword. And Arthur at first thinks, well, okay, I'm going to use this for my squabble again and get vengeance. And Merlin's like, no, have you not learned anything? And yeah, the sword is supposed to, it's a representation of the path of God.
But isn't that interesting though? Because I mean, Excalibur just simply isn't in Monmouth. So, but anyway, regardless of that, it's interesting, isn't it? This theme of Christianity versus all sorts of paganism. So, for example, Arthur is supposed to be Christian. They're Christians, aren't they?
Yeah.
Vortigern and Uther Pendragon, they're all Christians because the Saxons, Hengist and Horsa, etc., explicitly aren't. Right, so they're Christians already. Obviously, Geoffrey of Monmouth himself in the 12th century, very Christian. It's a highly, highly Christianised society, of course. And still even in the age of Chrétien de Troyes and Thomas Malory. But then, so the Lady in the Lake, that's not a Christian thing. Like having a deity, there's like having Merlin, like the magic of Merlin, that's very unchristian. There's loads of really unchristian things in the Arthurian legends, like strictly speaking. Like the idea of Lancelot running off and committing adultery. It's very unchristian.
Yeah.
There's all sorts of, whilst it being firmly Christian, the Christianity is good and anything pagan is bad, but yet there's loads of pagan themes and elements in it still.
I have my own theory about paganism and how our ancestors converted, and how that was viewed in an early medieval context. I believe that our ancestors saw Christianity as a fulfillment of what they already believed in, and which is why in the early Celtic Christian church they often incorporate their old pagan ways into that of the new knowledge of Christ. But the beauty about the later Arthurian stories is that they represent very real aspects of human nature. For example, Mordred is supposed to represent everything wrong with man when it comes to corruption, vice, and self-interest. But there's something also very real about him. And Gareth Knight talks about that in his book, is he sort of justifies his own actions when it comes to claiming the throne for himself and so on. And it's supposed to represent that you can all fall into the trap of Mordred. And it's important to learn from Mordred so you recognise these flaws and faults. I think the later adaptations is really equivalent to an older version of the Lord of the Rings. Really, I like to say it's exactly what Tolkien was doing in our own time. Writers of the past were doing for their people.
Well, Tolkien was certainly fascinated by it. There's no doubt. I think. Am I right in thinking there was an unfinished poem he was writing specifically, exactly on Arthur, his own Arthurian?
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So there's no question. I mean, Tolkien was a medievalist, or not even medievalist. What was he? He was a scholar, a professor of history, and so he will have known the Arthurian legends inside out. Absolutely,
because the One Ring is actually mentioned in the later Arthurian legends as well, and that turns men invisible.
Where would that? I don't know where that be.
I forgot the name. I read it in here.
But it is interesting the way I think. Well, when you actually read, not as much Monmouth, more Chrétien de Troyes and Mallory, there's lots of un-Christian themes that are woven into it. Where if you were a strict Christian, I mean, I'm thinking like a 17th century Puritan, or you were an Anabaptist, like a uber strict Protestant or crazily Orthodox Catholic or something, you could read it and be like, oh, that's heterodox. That's not cool. That's not okay. Right. But a lot of people obviously loved it. Like Chrétien de Troyes was fantastically popular during his own lifetime. Yeah. Because people loved it. They loved a bit of magic. Yeah. A bit of mythical spirits and
he sort of had those blood memories as well from all.
And the romance of it. Yeah. The romance of it. Whether so.
But Diane Fortune, who taught Gareth Knight, an occultist, she talks about this in her book Aspects of Occultism. She talks about how the Catholic Church integrated our beliefs in multiple gods through that of saints. So Bridget, the goddess Bridget in Irish mythology, is transformed into Saint Bridget in the Catholic Church. The way that our pagan ancestors understood gods, they believed there was the one God, which was the true Lord, the creator of the universe, but they also believed there was different deities to pray to, such as Catholics today, including myself, pray to different saints. So that pagan element was transformed into, was integrated into Christianity. So there's tons of examples of the early church integrating our old spiritual understanding.
Well, I think just like today, you've got lots of Christians. Perhaps the majority are Christian, but there are still some pagan people today, to this very day, practicing pagans. I suspect that's sort of always been the case throughout the centuries. I mean, you look at like the very early, I mean, I suppose Christianity first came over to Britain at some point in the 1st century AD, I would have thought, at some point with the Romans. So it's been here ever since then. But if you take like the age of St. Augustine of Canterbury, it's not like within a generation or two there were no pagans. That wasn't the case. There would have been a transitional period that lasted generations and generations, and it was never stamped out entirely. there would always have been.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you take Ireland, for example, one thing I was thinking of just earlier today when I was just sitting there just thinking, obviously Ireland is much more staunchly Catholic than mainland England to this day, and yet they revere their pre-Christian like megaliths and their fairy circles and all sorts of stuff even more than we do.
Yeah.
So it's it has always been a transition which hasn't really ended.
Yeah.
And no side was completely victorious.
Well, linking back to Joffrey, he talks about this transition from paganism to Christianity.
Because Bede is endlessly fascinated with that,
Yeah.
isn't he? Or aghast by it, whichever way you want to look at it.
Yeah. Well, the point that Geoffrey makes, which might reveal some truth in the old tradition, is that we had our own archbishop system via the Druids, and that once Christianity came, they just had the same system, but under the Catholic Church. And he talks about how the majority of the Britons convert to Christianity, but there is some pagans that refuse to convert. And try to go back to the older ways. I think Vortigern might have been one of those pagans, because when he goes to Snowdonia and his court says, okay, well, you have to sacrifice a child, which sort of shows that he isn't a Christian king whatsoever. You know, he's not aspiring to the higher powers. He's aspiring to darker forces that will work in his interest to deliver what he wants in the material realm. But what's interesting about, and one old Hutton talks about this, you know, the modern forms of paganism we have today, such as Wicca, they're just modern understandings of the past. They're people putting their modern conception onto the past. It doesn't come from any actual old pagan religious beliefs. It's completely interpretation. So we've lost a lot of the knowledge we had of the older religions. But I believe that it's to best understand the older religions, you actually have to look at the early Christian church, and in a British context, the early Celtic Christian church, in order to truly grasp what our ancestors believed and understood.
We hope you enjoyed that video, and if you did, please head over to lotuseaters.com for the full unabridged video.